Hello, I'm continuing my reviews on the Terminator movies with Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. Now, Terminator 3 came out in 2003, and this, of course, is the third film in the Terminator series. Now, at the end of Terminator 2, they managed to destroy the T-1000, and then the Terminator that was sent back in time to protect John has himself destroyed, and basically by doing that, they stopped Skynet, or at least it appeared in that movie that they stopped Skynet from ever existing, which also prevented Judgment Day from ever happening. So in this movie, you realize that in between the events of Terminator 2 and this movie, Sarah Connor actually died of cancer, so ever since then, John has been kind of living off the grid, and even though they appeared to have stopped Judgment Day, John still feels like something bad is going to happen. So in this movie, you realize that Skynet still ended up getting created, and Judgment Day still ended up happening at a certain point in the future. Like John Connor and his mother, they didn't really stop Judgment Day, they only postponed it. So it turns out Judgment Day still happened, and the war with the machines still happened. So in this movie, a female Terminator called the TX is sent back in time to kill John Connor, so a good Terminator is also sent back in time to protect him, and from then on it almost becomes more or less a repeat of the plotline of the second film. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting is in this movie, the TX, she's sent back in time not just to kill John Connor, but also to kill other people who in the future would become very important in John Connor's fight against the machines. Now, a lot of people really hate this movie. Like, a lot of people call this, like, one of the worst sequels ever made. And in my opinion, now keep in mind, I don't think the movie's great. Like, this movie, it's not great at all, and it does not hold a candle to the first two movies at all. But I honestly don't think the film's that bad. I really don't. Once again, it's not a great movie, and it does have a lot of problems, but overall, I really didn't think the film was that bad of a movie. Now, one problem I have with this movie is there's kind of a continuity issue, or kind of like a timeline issue, and yes, I know, to be fair, if you stop to think about it, the first two Terminator movies, the whole plotline of those movies is technically one big timeline issue, but that was kind of the point of the first two movies, the whole idea that both John Connor and Skynet were both born out of this time paradox. But in this movie, John Connor says that he was 13 years old during the events of Terminator 2, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because John Connor was born around 1985, and a lot of people say that Terminator 2 was supposed to take place in the year 1995 when John was 10 years old, and for John to have been 13 during the events of Terminator 2, that means Terminator 2 had to take place roughly around 97 or 98, and if it was 98, it was well past when Judgment Day was already supposed to happen until Sarah Connor and John Connor quote-unquote stopped Judgment Day. It really doesn't make a lot of sense for Terminator 2 to take place around 97 or 98, but according to this movie, it did, because they say in this movie that he was 13 years old when that movie happened. Now, in the first two movies, all the timeline issues were kind of done on purpose. In this movie, I really don't think that was done on purpose. I really think it was just the writers not really thinking that through. Now, one thing that really does kind of drag this movie down for me is all the humor that's in the movie. Now, to be fair, there was humor in the first two movies, more so the second movie. Like, in the second movie, you had scenes where John Connor was trying to teach the Terminator how to be more human, and you got a lot of humor in those scenes, but the humor in Terminator 2, when you had funny moments in that movie, they came off as genuinely human moments. In this movie, the humor just seems kind of forced. Like, the humor in this movie just seems like humor for the sake of being humor, and really the humor in this movie is so over the top in the first half of the movie that the first half of the movie, some of it borders on being almost a comedy. Now, in the second half of the movie, it definitely gets a lot darker when you realize just how much is at stake, but there's a lot of comedy in the first half of the movie, and some of it, I will admit, is kind of funny, but it's just, it doesn't fit well for the tone of this movie. Like, in this movie, like, when the Terminator goes back in time, now, of course, if you're familiar with the first two movies, you know that you can't travel through time wearing clothes, so the Terminator comes back in time and ends up at this bar, which it turns out is actually a strip club, and it's ladies' night there, so he walks in there, and there's like a male stripper on the stage wearing a getup that suits the Terminator, no pun intended, and he goes up to the male stripper going, "Your clothes, give them to me now." And you have the male stripper go, "Talk to the hand," and then you have the Terminator grab it and actually talk into it going, "No." So you have, like, very humorous scenes like that, and then after that, when he gets his clothes, you see him walk out of the strip club wearing, like, these sunglasses that are shaped like stars, and it's like, what the fuck? Then later on in the movie, you see the Terminator at a gas station taking all this food, and he just walks out of the gas station without paying, and the kid at the clerk at the gas station is like, are you gonna pay for that? And then the Terminator actually freaking goes, "Talk to the hand," and it's so freaking stupid. I'll admit it is kind of funny, but it would have fit better in, like, something that was meant to be a parody on the Terminator as opposed to an actual Terminator movie. And then you also have a scene where the TX sees a billboard for Victoria's Secret, and you see a woman with big tits on the billboard, and she actually makes her tits grow bigger. It's like, was there really a point to that? So there's a lot of humor in the first half of the movie, and the humor in this movie, it kind of drags the movie down for me. Now, one thing about this movie that does kind of make me scratch my head is John Connor in the beginning of the movie is living in Los Angeles. Now, he also lived in Los Angeles in the not the first movie, in the second movie, and he's living off the grid because he's so afraid that the Terminators are gonna come back for him. Why don't you try leaving the city? Like, sure, the Terminators will probably be able to find you wherever you are, but you have a better chance of hiding from these things if you're not living in the same place where they think you're going to be. Now, in the film, the effects in the movie, most of it, I would say, is pretty good. Like, Stan Winston does the effects for this movie, and he also did the effects for the first two Terminator movies. But in this movie, you have some really good effects, but then you have some CGI effects in this movie, which are very noticeably CGI. Like, they're the kinds of CGI effects where you could tell it's CGI, and that's not really a good thing, in my opinion. Now, I know I'm bringing up more negative than positive, and I really don't think it's that bad of a movie. I just wanted to really get out of the way a lot of the negatives about this movie. And I hate to say it, I kind of have more negatives than positives, yet overall, I enjoyed the film. Like, the film, it's entertaining. It's not as good as the first two, but it's at least entertaining despite its problems. The real problem with this movie is it's really just a cheesy action movie, while the first two movies, while being very entertaining films, definitely had deeper meaning to them. The first two movies, more so the second movie, really did have messages in them about humanity and about mankind's place in the universe. This movie, it tries to have that, but it really does come off as being more of just a cheesy action movie. Now, one thing that I will say about this movie is I do think most of the acting in this movie is pretty good. Like, Arnold Schwarzenegger, of course, reprises his role as the Terminator. Obviously not the same character from the previous film, but supposed to be the same model of Terminator, and he does do a good job in this movie, and I actually really liked the guy who played John Connor in this movie. I think the actor's name is Nick Stahl, and he actually does do a really, really good job in this movie as John Connor. Like, I believed him as an older version of the same character that we saw in Terminator 2. So, Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, it's not a great movie, but I found it to be entertaining, so the movie, to me, it is what it is. So yeah, that's my review on Terminator 3, and bye.